We're going to check out some of the most amazing boar feasts that ever happened 10,000 years ago in Southwest Asia. All right, everybody, welcome to Old News with Flint Dibble, and I am Flint Dibble. This is our very first inaugural episode. What is our next section? Animal tales, and by tales I mean tales, right? We mean tales. So archaeologists discovered that parties 11,000 years ago were BYOB. Bring your own beer. I mean boar. Yes. Yeah. So parties were bring your own boar 11,000 years ago. So what do we mean by that? So apparently, there's this site of Asiab, and it was in an environment favorable to wild boars. But they also not only consumed local wild boars, but they brought in wild boars from very far away to consume in these feasts in the Neolithic and Southwest Asia. So this is right around the time of Göbekli Tepe, and this is in the Zagros mountain range in Iran. Let's zoom in on it so we can see where it is. This is right around the time, a little before the domestication of boars into pigs, and right a little before the domestication of sort of plants and the development of agriculture is what we're talking about here. And so these were found in a pit. So I looked up the article that published the Zooarchaeology, the analysis of the boars, not just the scientific study of the chemicals, the isotopes, and the histology of them. And so this article was written in 2019, I think it was, by Pernil Bansgaard and others. And so these boar skulls came from a pit that had 19 wild boar skulls at a minimum, carefully placed inside and subsequently sealed. It also included the antler from red deer and the skull of a brown bear within the pit. And the boars were both male and female, and they varied in age. So this site was excavated originally. It was discovered in 1959. It was excavated by Robert Braidwood and others, and Howe. And it was a huge site. 20,000 square meters was this hunter-gatherer site. So it's one of these, we have to stop thinking of hunter-gatherers as simple. Hunter-gatherers were very complex, particularly in this region of Southwest Asia and the Zagros Mountains, all the way across the Fertile Crescent to areas like the Levant and Göbekli Tepe and Anatolia. And so at the time, they only excavated a single large trench. And then an Iranian and Danish collaboration started in 2016, and they returned, and they opened up the area that was excavated earlier in the 59 and 60s period. And then they continued excavating areas, and they found this boar pit right here, which is just phenomenal. I love boar pits. Who doesn't love a boar pit, right? And so there's some cool stuff here. This is what you can see. They're all fragmented up. They actually lifted a big block of it to be excavated very carefully in the lab so they could do it properly. And they measured the bones and the teeth from these boar, and they determined that these were not domestic boar. These are wild boar. They've not undergone the change in size that indicates domestication. And so these were still larger wild boar at this time, even though it's just barely on the cusp of when domestication occurs. There's at least 19 boar skulls in the pit. On the left is sort of modern skulls, and it shows the zones they use to be able to count individuals. And then all these fragments, they sort of laid them all out, and they determined this piece can't be from the same individual as that piece because it comes from the same zone. And they were able to determine there needs to be at least 19 different skulls carefully within this pit. It ended up being obviously fragmented over the 11,000 year span since burial. The mortality profiles, so the ages of slaughter, are actually really interesting. There's a younger set of boar here, and there's more females, which some people think is maybe means they were managed, but it also might mean that they were a hunting strategy that targeted more younger boar, which is certainly possible. And so at the same time, we have good evidence for butchery. A large proportion of the bones have cut and chop marks. And so the processes were carcass. They demonstrate that the flesh and marrow within the jaw and the tongues were removed. They cautiously estimate, based on data that from wild boar in Italy, that 19 boar would have produced a minimum of 700 kilos of dressed weight, including meat, heads, skins, and bones. So, what that means is that this could have fed anywhere, depending on how much people ate, between 350 to 1,200 adult individuals. So, this is quite a feast that is represented just from this one individual deposit with all of these boar, let alone some of the parts of other animals. We saw there was a skull of a bear as well as some red deer. Um, and so I got in touch with my old friend. I've known Petra Vaiglova, the lead author of the scientific study that was just published. We worked together in a lab in Athens back years ago. And so I got in touch with her via email to talk me through what some of these results are. Here's some photos of her studying these very boar teeth. Oh, wait, sorry. I wanted to have her introduce herself to you.
As an archaeologist, I'm interested in questions about our human past. Not lost treasures or chronologies of kings and queens, or what life was like for people living in ancient palaces. I want to know what life was like for common people, for the farmers that grew staple crops, for the shepherds that herded animals that were sacrificed in rituals, and for people who put food on the table in a family household. Understanding how normal people lived is key to understanding how societies functioned and evolved. In my work, I use techniques that archaeologists have borrowed from the natural sciences, chemistry, biochemistry, geology, to analyze the materials that we have uncovered at archaeological sites at a molecular level. This enables us to study what people in the past ate, how they transformed their environments, and how they moved across large and small distances. Today, I want to share with you some of the work that I have done and reflect on some of the lessons that
Dr. Vaiglova, she works at Australian National University, the Shrimp Lab, which is the sensitive high resolution ion microprobe, which is of course how they conducted this study. Here's some so she does scientific studies of animal and human remains. She does isotopic analysis and other things, and she uses this kind of lab to be able to do that, which I think is really cool. I'm actually jealous. My lab here is pretty cool. I work at the Cardiff University Bioarchaeology Lab, but this one is sort of making me a little jealous. I don't know what else to say. There she is with a horse tooth that she's studying, and they sort of solidify it in resin, and then they saw it to create the samples, which they then do high precision studies of, which are really cool, and we're going to look at right now. So this is using cutting edge methods. So it's using kind of the sectioning that we showed just there, and then histology, which she collaborated with some biology people that are biologists to be able to study the sort of the tissue and how the tissue was made up from these teeth and bones. And then doing isotope analysis. We'd seen isotope analysis earlier for diet. This isotope analysis was instead looking at the regions that these animals lived in versus the region where they ended up deposited at Asiab in the Zagros Mountains, as well as mapping out these kind of elements to be able to spatially resolve them, and that's barium. And so doing all of this together creates a really, really interesting interdisciplinary study, which of course is why it was published in Nature. And so she shared with me this image, which is from the supplemental materials, which I didn't actually go to bother to read. So we should thank Petra that she shared this with me. What you're seeing here, these lines, they represent daily growth. The enamel that's laid down in the tooth of these boars on different days. Isn't that really cool? So if you take a sample from here, I don't know if you could actually do that, versus there, you're getting a different sense of what's going on that day when that enamel was laid down and formed from the meal that that boar ate in the region that it was in, which is absolutely mind-blowing to me. And yes, that is absolutely cutting edge. I did not even know that this was possible. And to be honest, neither did she. This is through her interdisciplinary collaboration with biologists. Maybe she knew it was possible, but she'd never done it before. So yeah, really, really cool to see these kind of daily growth rings. It's like the rings of a tree every year, except it's every day, which is just the kind of resolution that we're going to be able to get in the future. Is cool as hell. So what we're looking at here is another one of these isotope graphs, and let's sort of explain it. So the bottom axis from left to right, that is thinking of every week of tooth growth. of this animal when it was young. Every week it's laying down an enamel, and you're taking a sample from sort of the bottom of the tooth, which would be the latest stuff that was formed, all the way to the top of the tooth, which is because the tooth grow out and up. That would have been the earliest enamel that was formed. And so what we're looking at on the left is the season of the year. This is the oxygen and the altitude. Oxygen kind of tracks the water, sort of the entire water system. So in the winter versus the summer, there's a different water system. If these animals are in the uplands versus the lowlands, there's a different water system. If they're near rivers or they're drinking groundwater, that's going to be a different water system. So that's what that's tracking during the growth of these teeth. On the right, though, is tracking strontium, which is tracking the geological signature of the mineral component inside the water that these boar are drinking, are consuming. And so what's really clear is you can see this red individual, this red lines on both of them. That is an outlier. This red individual came from a very different region, and we can see this in both the oxygen and the strontium than the other 4 individuals that were studied in this way, which is absolutely mind-blowing. And I'm going to blow your mind even further. Guess which one came from further away? Not the single outlier. The single outlier actually came from somewhere relatively close to the site. It was the other 4 individuals that came from a completely different region, geologically speaking. And in fact, they came from a region that would have had to have been at least at a minimum 75 or so kilometers away. I repeat, 4 out of 5 of the individuals that were studied from this boar pit came from an area at least 70 or so kilometers away, which is absolutely mind-blowing. These are hunted animals that they hunted and brought there. 70 kilometers. What is that? That's like 50 miles, something like that. And by foot, we're talking 11,000 years ago. There's no horses to ride. There's no cars to drive. There's no motorcycles to get on or buses or trains. There is your feet and shoes, maybe like those that we just saw at Vindolanda. And so they're transporting them at least 70 kilometers and quite a significant number of these individuals. So Petra and her team came up with 3 different hypotheses for this sort of feast. There are several plausible scenarios. First, maybe the inhabitants traveled to hunt the animals in far-off locations and brought them back. Second, maybe inhabitants of settlements further away traveled bringing the boars they hunted at their own home as a contribution to the communal feast. Third, maybe people consumed the boars at a distant location and traveled there with the heads as a hunting trophy for ritual deposition. So each scenario, though, is a big friggin' deal. If you're going off and hunting at least 2 to 3 days walk away and you're bringing back those animals, that's a lot of effort. If you live 3 days away, 2-3 days away, and you're carting your boar with you for a feast, that's a lot of effort. If you're just bringing the dang head with you, that's still a lot of effort, right? So they favor the second one. They favor the second one partly due to ethnography and the idea that what they're probably doing is cementing social relationships between participants and in the realm of which hunting took place. And so it's about reciprocity, cementing social bonds, making friends, pouring one out for your homies, that kind of stuff. I like that hypothesis too. It obviously still needs some testing to be able to determine one or the other, finding some other examples. But yeah, somebody asked, can you herd pigs? You can herd domestic pigs, but you can't herd wild boar. In fact, wild boar, as Petra notes, are fairly rare, rarely hunted in this region because they were prestige and dangerous animals to hunt. And this is when they're definitely still wild, as we showed. Last thing I want to highlight is this paleo art that was made by the illustrator Catherine Kalaki, who is just a phenomenal paleo artist. Her website is in the description below if you need some paleo artistry done. And she wrote a thread on Blue Sky about the effort that she went to synthesize for this visualization. And she pulled out some zoom-ins and described them and things like that. And I mean, it's just phenomenal, the kind of effort that she did. She went back and forth with the researchers, asking them different questions about the seasonality, the vegetation, the material culture, how these houses could have looked, these structures that were built there. And the kind of what was there, she did comparisons to other nearby sites to fill in the picture. And this kind of effort, she included these details like this kind of jewelry that they're wearing, the ornamentation of a red deer antler. And she specifically chose wild boar tusks as jewelry because these boar, by the way, were missing their tusks. They were pulled out, so they were being used elsewhere. Or the red deer antler that was in that very pit where this was deposited, or finding a point of view that showed what she wanted to show. Looking over the river towards the site did its best. She'd love to fully develop an image of people washing up and primping before making a big entrance. There's hints of that here, like this guy who's pulled out his best tunic and is tying his shoes. So, this kind of effort that's in all these little details, and this is what newspapers are using to advertise this article, this kind of AI crap. This AI crap, after all the effort that Catherine Kalaki put in, they're using this stuff. They're even going so far, Petra shared this one with me, they're even going so far as feeding in Catherine's beautiful paleo art into an AI generator to generate something that's similar but different. Notice the Boris Tusk thing. Doesn't this guy look the same as the guy we just saw? Why do we live in such a crappy world? Or how about this image that appeared in one of these articles where notice Iran is right next to Iran. And everything is wrong here. There is no strontium-6, for example. That would be a different isotope. There's strontium-87, yeah, but there's no strontium-6. Or as Petra pointed out, this looks like one of those wormholes in Dune, the movie at all. And so I just want to highlight just how important this kind of really good art is that Catherine Kalaki does. She and others do such an amazing job, and you will not see us using this kind of slop on this channel ever. Okay, what is up next as we sift through some archaeology news? Are you tired of all the news? There's just so much going on in the news. Like, look at the size of this ancient Roman shoe. This is what we're here with for old news with Flint Dibble. We're gonna look at this shoe that apparently perplexes archaeologists. Or does it?
We're not perplexed at all, in fact.
Beyond that, we're gonna look at how shifts in the magnetic poles tens of thousands of years ago that ancient humans and Neanderthals adapted to. Or what about the Antikythera device? Is it a computer?
Had to rethink the history of technology completely as a result of this single object.
We're gonna look at the shipwreck that it's from, and finally, we're gonna check out some of the most amazing boar feasts that ever happened 10,000 years ago in Southwest Asia. Stay tuned for the very first episode of Old News with Flint Dibble. And I'm Flint Dibble. See you soon.